About 26,000 years ago, 3 teenagers were laid to rest in a common grave near a village called Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic of Moravia. They were all laid side by side, and their bodies had been placed such that the individual on the right had been buried face down, while the individual on the left had his hand placed over the middle skeleton's pelvic area, which in turn had been covered in red ochre. And if you think that's not enough, stick around, because it gets, gets a bit complicated, doesn't it, Rupert?
Complicated doesn't even come close. It's an extraordinary burial. Yeah, where do we want to start with this? I mean, there are so many details. I think it's important to give it some context to begin with, and the fact that this is a period kind of in the glacial period where temporarily ice sheets were actually retreating slightly, and some of the lowlands going through what's now Czech Republic, Austria, and up through there, where lowlands were more green. There were less ice. The ice had been retreating north and then up into the mountains to the south. So there was a much more habitable zone going down through the middle, and that's where all this was taking place.
I think also reiterate the fact that just one mention of it may be glossed over. People may sort of move past it, but I said right at the top, 26,000 years ago. And it's just worth letting that sink in, I think, probably as a bit of context, because, we're talking 20,000 years at least before Stonehenge. Okay, does that help?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very good point. And the extraordinary thing about the site itself, Dolní Věstonice, I keep mispronouncing that, Dolní Věstonice. The extraordinary thing about this, it's a huge site. Yeah. It was found originally. It was found in the 1920s, and excavations went on. Then it was re-excavated. It was actually a rescue thing, wasn't it, Michael? I think they were going to do some development there, and so there was a huge excavations took place because of that. The reason it's become more into the news is something that we'll get onto shortly. That's more to do with some DNA results that have come out from tests, but the excavations themselves revealed an incredible amount of complex stuff going on in this burial that we've never really seen anything quite like it before. Yeah.
We're talking about what's known as the Gravettian culture, or if you want to be actually more precise, in this particular area, there's a kind of subset of the Gravettian culture called the Pavlovian culture, named for a town, I think, in Czechoslovakia, not too far away from here. What defines the people, the hunter-gatherers, who were members of this culture, not that they were conscious of that at the time.
Didn't even know their name.
They were specialists. They were mammoth specialists. That was their meat and potatoes. Well, their meat anyway. And so much of the stuff of their culture revolves around. For instance, I think if we were to look at a Pavlovian settlement, we'd note the presence of mammoth tusks, because they were used in some of the construction of some of their houses. Just buttressing them up and keeping the warmth in. And in terms of how they looked, it was flipping freezing. It was cold. All right. These people were not surviving, in loose skins. They were, evidence has been found of the use of woven cloth, imprints in mud and stuff like that. So
do you know what? It's worth pausing on that for a moment as well. We're talking about 26,000 years ago, and they were weaving cloth. Yeah, there's nothing primitive in that context. There's nothing primitive about these people. They've got their daily life is well and truly under control, it would seem. Mm-hmm.
And an image that you may already be conscious of, and that is of the Venus statues, little statuettes. The most famous of which is the Willendorf which is from just down the road near Vienna, I do believe. I think Vienna's about an hour's drive from Dolní Věstonice. Yeah, about an hour's drive north from Vienna. But all over, I say there's only been one or two other Venus figures from, but I think there's one particular that's referred to as the Dolní Věstonice Venus, which, if we're lucky, I'll get a picture onto the screen right now.
Was that the black clay one?
Yes,
clay one, I think so.
Yeah. But, just to give you a sense, if you've seen this style, this is the ballpark we're in. This is the people we're with. That and carvings on ivory. There's a little head figurative stuff. Here's the thing. Figurative stuff from 26,000 years ago. I mean, there is a little, I think, a mammoth carving of a face, of somebody's face, which is supposed to represent something. Somebody. Again, we're getting off into the side areas. Is there anything more you can think of, that kind of contextualize this for people? It is fascinating, isn't it?
It is fascinating. No, I don't think there's any overall context that needs to be gone into here. I mean, if you just hold it in your head, really, that we're talking about this time during the Ice Age, but when there was this zone, if you like, that made life a bit more habitable there. But it's an extraordinary cultural thing. I mean, so should we get into the burial here?
I think so, but I just want to make a point before we do, and that is, it's one of these things where it strikes me that we often get into these fascinating areas because, we've seen a headline. And yet at the same time, all we can do is do a sort of rather superficial flyby of the meat, of the real meat of it. And in the end, we end up just glossing over what, for many people, this whole thing, the Gravettian, this particular site, Dolní Věstonice, is a lifetime's work. There's decades and decades of work that has gone into producing this material, and what suddenly draws our attention to it, is a very narrow window in the whole thing. But grateful for that, grateful for this window, grateful for this headline to illuminate this part of prehistory. So sorry, yes, this Upper Paleolithic.
It's all right. Do you know what? It's a valid point that we could make about any news piece that we ever do, couldn't we? That we tell you about something in 10 minutes, and it's been 20 years of somebody's life. It's a good point. It is a good point.
Anyway, back to the burial.
Back to the burial.
Where to start?
Yes. Do you know what? I'm going to just. I think let's just toss some details out here. The one that I'm going to get out of the way is that this whole burial. So these three people who were buried laid side by side, they were covered over by burnt spruce branches and twigs. So this was a protected burial. It was covered over. If you like, primitive though it may be, it was a tomb of sorts.
But it was dug into the earth. There wasn't any structure apart from what was probably made out of timber around it at the time.
Yeah. It's an intriguing aspect that you're saying dug into the earth, that although the burial itself is on a slope, that the way they're buried into the slope, it's as if there was a sort of platform created for the burial, which is, so there's a lot of preparation went into this. Red ochre. We see red ochre the world over. We see red ochre used in all manner of prehistoric cultures, but here it's really, really interesting that of the three individuals, that their heads were adorned, if that's the right word, with red ochre, but where the man on the left had his hands over the pelvis of the person in the middle, the person in the middle's pelvis was also covered with red ochre. Now that's an intriguing aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the aspect that has sort of drawn people in and tickled people's imaginations. Before we deal with that, though, I think a few other details should be brought to people's attention. We've got adornment in terms of animal bone and animal teeth, I think, certainly applied to the head of the guy on the left.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll sort of get the headline stuff out of the way. Now, originally, the middle figure, the middle skeleton, was interpreted as having been female. Informed perhaps by this rather strange attitude of the guy on the left to his left-hand partner, as you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And the being sort of some kind of sexual connotation going on there. However, it has later been determined that in actual fact the central skeleton is male, with the complication that person was suffering from, is it a congenital disease?
Indeed, and that's
disease.
one of the other reasons that it was interpreted originally to be female, because when this disease occurs in males, usually the male doesn't survive infancy. So if you have an adult male with this problem, it's very, very rare, apparently.
Chondrodysplasia punctata.
There you go. Who knew?
Well, I didn't. It's written here.
Very good. But it's, I mean, that disfigurement, if you like. I mean, the fact that they are the central figure in the burial, it's yet another instance, where somebody who would, in any other set of circumstances, you would say that this person was going to be one of the weaker, more vulnerable people in society, and yet here they are laid in a burial as the central person in this grave. That in itself is interesting.
While you say that, it's worth mentioning that this person was the elder of the three.
True too.
20 years old. The guy on the left was 17 to 19 years old, and the guy on the right was 16 to 17 year old. So, relatively young, obviously. But also this chondrodysplasia displays in later years as bowing of some of the bones. There would be a curvature of the spine. It's not the same in all cases. It affects different people as they grow in different ways. But in this case, I think there is a bowing of the thigh bones. So there was a certain amount of disfigurement and a sort of ambiguity about the sexuality as well, about gender.
Yeah. Well, to further confound this, that when they did the DNA analysis on them, establishing that this central figure was male, they also found out that the central body and the one on the right, the one that was laid face down on the right, they were actually brothers. And the one on the left, who had his hands over the pelvis of the central body, was either a cousin or a half-brother. Mm-hmm. So this is a family burial as well, which makes the arrangement of the bodies even stranger.
Yeah. The whole area, the remains were surrounded by animal bones, some of them perforated. I think there was some needles or some sort of ivory or bone. There were pendants of ivory, lumps of baked clay. Interesting. Because a lot of the sort of the work that is you associate with the Gravettian work is baked clay, animal figurines, and representational things, and shells. From the Mediterranean.
Yes.
No flint,
Yes.
interestingly, because there was quite a lot of flint associated with this culture. But anyway, there we are. As we've built up a picture of complication, with no real thing to join it all together and make it into a nice story. Wow. Because really, where would you begin to make?
Well, there are so many possible interpretations. Some are good, some are not so good. Yeah. But it's all we can do is give you the facts, really.
Yeah.
I think to pick up on a detail that you mentioned earlier on, because I think it puts so much colour onto these characters, really. The fact that the one on the left had this, what seemed to be like whether it was a frontlet or of some description, but the carnivore teeth that had been laid into this in 3 rows, and with the largest at the top going down to smaller teeth at the bottom. So this band of teeth going around the head. Now that's an interesting sort of headdress right there. And the fact that they were perforated means... Now, did that mean that they were originally strung as bracelets but had been turned into this, or was that the way that they actually strung them into the clay and the cloth is, the thread has long since disappeared and it's just the teeth left in the clay?
Yeah.
Again, it's just... pictures. It just adds to a vision of what these people must have looked like.
Well, everybody wants to make a story, don't they? And early days, I think before it was established that the central figure was in fact male, there was all sorts of not that stopped speculation, but before that there was speculation. For instance, and I'm reading this, that the male on the left was that the female may have died during childbirth. And according to this scenario, the male on the left was a medicine man due to the mask he was wearing, while the other male was her husband. As these men were held responsible for her death, they followed her into the afterlife.
It's breathtaking, isn't it?
Yeah, and then that's just an example. And then before even he was determined to be male, was speculation that he might be male. And then we all got into speculation there was a homosexual relationship going on. How do you... You can't. You just can't. You can. You can make up all the stories you like, but, whether one of them's true or not is another matter entirely.
Would you mentioning, the notions of a homosexual relationship between them, there was another aspect that it was the original interpretation had been that a wooden pole had been thrust through the thigh and into the coccyx of the figure on the right, the one that's buried facing down. And it seems from later interpretations that was complete nonsense, that it was just to do with the way tree roots had grown through the grave over the subsequent however many millennia. And so it was, that first interpretation was just way, way off the mark. And you can imagine brought all sorts of other possible interpretations into the fray, which is just completely out of the window.
Honest truth is we don't know the provenance of that first declaration and, what it was actually subsequently that I suspect, to do with the tree roots. But also something we found out from another source, which hasn't been mentioned in a lot of the literature we've read, that there was an animal bone in the teeth of the central skeleton that had cut marks on it.
I couldn't find any other references to that, but that certainly was reported. Interesting that there were cut marks on that. And you mentioning cut marks reminds me of another feature of this. Adjacent to the burial was a hearth, and when I say adjacent, I mean really close. We're talking about just a metre away from the burial. And one of the artefacts, it was broken into 5 pieces, but one of the artefacts found in the hearth was a piece of siltstone that had 29 notches engraved in it, and that has been interpreted as a lunar calendar, which is distinctly possible. It's not the first time we've come across
just a little reminder. Just a little reminder. 26,000 years ago. 20,000 years before Stonehenge.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And I'll toss another thing into the mix here, and that's that because Dolní Věstonice is, it's a big excavation. There's work has been going on there for a long time. And there was another completely separate burial of an older man found at the site. And intriguingly, he was also adorned, his head and pelvis, both adorned with red ochre. So clearly, even though we have no idea what that symbolism may be, but clearly head and pelvis were, and adorning them with red ochre was a thing for these people.
And there were other wonderful burials as well associated with this site, which would be too much of a sidebar to go into here. But a general point, and it's a point you made early before we started this recording, Rupert, and that is what is weird. Weird's the wrong word, really, but there's something very particular about this grouping of burials, and I think we can speak in general for burials from this part of the world, from Central Europe and Eastern Europe, that they have there's a character about them and a personality that seems to zing through the ages in ways that much more recent burials, for example, that we're familiar with, in Britain, say Amesbury Archer and those kinds they've got plenty of bling to bring with them and stuff, but they don't sing with this resonance of significance and personal
they lack
belief.
The individuality.
Yeah.
As you say, there's the bling, but there's nothing that seems to be profoundly personal. Yeah, I don't know. It's an intriguing thing. There's something we must explore.
And why is it, that graves and burials like this sing right through the years on a personal level, albeit enigmatically, like we can't really get there, but we know that there's something there. We know that there's something there beyond our reach. That's the intriguing thing about the character of these kinds of burials. And this one so much in particular. I don't think we can go on much more, to be honest. I think we've sold it.
We've given you the facts. Make up your own minds. Answers on a postcard, please.
Say that quite a lot. Well, I hope that you find this good material in there to go hunting for yourselves and go looking at the Gravettian culture and the Dolní Věstonice itself. It's fascinating. I'll tell you what, Rupert, they've got a fantastic museum there at Dolní Věstonice.
We should make a point of getting there at some point.
Yeah, all about the prehistory of the area. It's a stunning piece of architecture, aside from anything else. I want to go there and visit. Okay, well, and that's a wrap on that one, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
We'll see you again soon, folks.
Yeah, check out the Patreon link in the description below. But apart from that, nothing more to say, but subscribe and like if you feel so inclined. We'd be very grateful. Till next time, ta-ra from me.
Cheers, folks. Bye.